Have you ever felt that hollow silence? The one that follows when someone walks away, not with noise, but with absence? It's the kind of silence that lingers, not just in the air, but in your chest, where hope once lived. When rejection arrives, it rarely knocks. It simply closes a door, and you're left staring at it, confused, aching, wondering what part of you wasn't enough. But what if I told you? Rejection isn't a dead end. It's a redirection. Louise said, "Every rejection is a redirection to your truth. Not to your flaw, not to your failure, but to your truth. And your truth is not something anyone else can hand you. It's something you remember, slowly, painfully, beautifully, once the illusion of being chosen by another is stripped away. Because when someone doesn't choose you, life is quietly whispering, 'Now, it's your turn. Choose yourself, more deeply than you ever have. Not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because you were never meant to be kept in a space that didn't reflect your light.' Rejection has a strange way of uncovering the parts of us we've hidden to be accepted. It shines a harsh, necessary light on the places we gave ourselves away, hoping to belong. The woman who was rejected isn't weak. She's not broken. She's just standing at the edge of a truth too sacred to ignore anymore. A truth that says, you were never meant to beg for what was yours by birthright. Love, respect, belonging. Not in someone else's hands, but in your own. You see, when the heart breaks, it's not just pain that pours out. It's potential. It's remembrance. And yes, it's terrifying. Because the mind will ask, what's wrong with me? That's the voice of the wounded child, still trying to earn love, still trying to be enough for someone who cannot see. But that question does not belong to the woman you are becoming. Clarissa Pinkola. Estes once wrote that a woman begins to come alive again when she stops begging for crumbs and remembers the wilderness inside her. That place where her instincts live. That place where her wisdom was never lost, only silenced. There is power in you. Wild, sacred, unshakable power. And sometimes it takes being left behind to finally walk toward it. This video isn't about how to be good enough for him. It's about becoming so whole, so true to yourself, that no one would ever dare to lose you again. Not even you. Especially not you. Because the woman who rises from rejection doesn't return to who she was. She becomes someone new. Someone she was always meant to be. Now let's walk through the fire together. Not to be burned, but to be reborn. The rejection that woke you up. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a silence that echoed louder than any argument. A pause that felt like a wound. The rejection wasn't dramatic. It was dry, simple, final. And yet, somehow it opened something ancient inside you. As if a portal had cracked open in your chest. That moment he didn't choose you. Something else did. Something far older than this story. Something wiser than your pain. That moment was the quiet birth of your awakening. Because rejection, though it stings like a slap, doesn't break you. It reveals you. It removes the mask you wore for too long. The one you used to stay lovable, to stay safe, to stay chosen. But you weren't truly seen behind that mask, were you? And deep down, you knew it. So when he walked away, the surface of your world shattered. But underneath, something truer began to stir. Not the woman who bends to be loved, but the one who remembers how to stand. Pain, when we listen closely, isn't punishment. It's a messenger. It comes carrying truths we were too afraid to face. It whispers the words we buried under years of pleasing, waiting, shrinking. It tells us, you've left yourself behind. Not once, not twice, but many times. And now, life is asking, no, insisting, that you come back to you. That's the paradox of heartbreak. It ends a story you thought you needed, and begins the one you were born to live. The no you heard from him? It wasn't the end. It was the sacred beginning of your own yes. A yes to your boundaries. A yes to your softness without apology. A yes to no longer staying where you're only half received. That moment of rejection, it didn't kill your worth. It reintroduced you to it. And yes, you cried. You questioned. You searched your reflection for answers that weren't there. You wondered what you did wrong. You tried to rewrite the past. But with every tear, with every sleepless night, something inside you was shifting. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. And though you couldn't see it yet, you were already rising. The hidden belief that kept you begging for belonging. There's a quiet thought that creeps in when he leaves. One that doesn't shout, but whispers so convincingly that you start to believe it. If I were good enough, he would have stayed. That single belief, wrapped in pain and confusion, becomes a cage. It's not just about him anymore. It's about every moment you ever felt not chosen, not seen, not wanted. And in that moment, you stop questioning him and start questioning yourself. You try harder. You replay conversations. You examine every detail of who you were and how you showed up, hoping to uncover the invisible flaw that pushed him away. But that kind of search is never fair, because you're not looking for truth. You're looking to blame yourself. And that is the hidden belief doing its damage. The belief that if you were somehow more gentle, more quiet, more agreeable, then maybe you wouldn't be here, alone. But here's what you need to hear, even if it shakes something inside you. Seeking approval at the cost of your truth is emotional self-abandonment. It's an old wound speaking, a voice from childhood that says, "If I'm perfect, I'll finally be loved." Louise Hay once said, "You have been criticizing yourself for years, and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." That approval, it begins when you stop looking at rejection as evidence of your inadequacy and start seeing it as exposure of an outdated belief system that was never yours to carry. You were never easy to abandon. You were simply taught to accept less than what you deserved. You were conditioned to think that love is something to earn, not something to receive freely. So every time you shape-shifted, every time you softened a boundary or swallowed a truth to keep someone close, you weren't weak. You were surviving. You were reenacting an old script that said, "Don't be too much. Don't need too much. Just be what they want." But that script doesn't serve the woman you are becoming, the one who doesn't just want to be chosen, but wants to choose herself first. And choosing yourself means unraveling the lie that love must be one. Real love, deep, conscious, nourishing love, never asks you to betray yourself in order to belong. And maybe, just maybe, the person you needed approval from most wasn't him. It was you. How the need for validation creates emotional invisibility. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unseen, from trying so hard to be loved that you slowly vanish in the process. You adjust your tone, your truth, your needs, hoping to be accepted. But the more you mold yourself into who you think they want, the more invisible you become. It's subtle at first. You silence a feeling. You ignore a need. You pretend something didn't hurt. Not because you're weak, but because you believe that love requires it. You believe that if you're easy, low maintenance, understanding, he'll stay. And maybe he does, for a while. But over time, you start to feel hollow, because he's not in love with you. He's in love with the version of you that never says, "I need more." That's the cost of external validation. It trains you to abandon your own emotional truth, to make yourself smaller, quieter, safer. But here's the paradox. The more you erase parts of yourself to be loved, the more you feel unloved, even when you're not alone. And eventually you begin to disappear, not just to him, but to yourself. There's a deeper pain hidden here, one that's older than this relationship. It's the fear that being fully yourself will push people away, that showing too much will be too much. So you keep performing, you keep adjusting, until one day you realize you no longer recognize the woman in the mirror. She's still smiling, still saying she's fine, but inside, she's starving for realness. And the heartbreaking truth is, maybe he didn't reject you. Maybe he reacted to your absence, to the emotional vacancy that happens when we prioritize being chosen over being known. And it's not your fault. You were taught that love meant compliance, that safety meant silence, that being worthy meant being agreeable. But there's a deeper wisdom emerging now, one that knows love is not a role you play, it's a space you hold, starting with yourself. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were simply disconnected from the parts of you that needed your own permission to exist. Maybe it's not about making someone stay. Maybe it's about finally staying with yourself. The turning point. When you decide to belong to yourself first. There comes a moment, quiet but unshakable, when a woman looks at herself in the mirror and says, "I can't keep abandoning myself like this." It's not a dramatic declaration. It's not born out of anger or revenge. It's a sacred decision, a return, a moment when exhaustion meets truth, and something inside her refuses to keep shrinking to fit into spaces that never honored her fullness. This turning point doesn't come when everything is calm. It usually comes in the ruins, when love has disappointed, when silence has wounded, when the weight has turned to weariness. It's that moment when she finally hears her own voice underneath the noise. And that voice doesn't beg. It doesn't bargain. It simply says, enough. Not enough in a way that closes her heart, but enough in a way that opens her soul. Because choosing to belong to yourself is not about isolation. It's about restoration. It's about remembering that your worth was never up for debate, that the love you were trying to earn was always meant to begin within. This is the birth of a different kind of woman. Not harder, not colder, but clearer. A woman who no longer waits to be seen to believe she matters. A woman who listens to her inner knowing before the outside noise. A woman who knows that belonging isn't something to chase. It's something to reclaim. And yes, it's lonely at first. Because you stop chasing the comfort of temporary affection. You stop bending for validation. You start walking with yourself. And that path can feel unfamiliar. But it's also where peace begins. Where clarity lives. Where you finally start to feel safe in your own skin. Louise Hay spoke of this power. The power of refusing to self-abandon. The power of standing in your own presence and saying, I approve of myself. Not because someone stayed. Not because someone chose you. But because you chose to come home. To you. And in that home, you don't have to perform. You don't have to apologize for your depth. You simply exist, fully. And that kind of presence, that kind of rooted, self-loving presence, is unforgettable. What changes in you? When you stop needing to be chosen, something profound shifts the moment you no longer live your life trying to be picked. The energy that once flowed outward, trying to impress, to please, to be enough, begins to return inward. You no longer measure your worth by how tightly someone holds on to you. You begin to feel whole, not because someone stayed, but because you finally stopped leaving yourself. When you stop needing to be chosen, a quiet kind of power emerges. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply magnetic. You don't walk into rooms wondering if you're wanted. You walk in already knowing you belong. You stop over-explaining your feelings, your needs, your dreams. You stop making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. You stop asking for space in someone else's heart and start creating sacred space in your own. This isn't arrogance. It's authenticity. It's the freedom that comes when love is no longer a performance, but a presence. When you stop trying to prove that you're lovable and simply become love in motion. And from that space, everything changes. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're truer. The woman who no longer needs to be chosen stops chasing closure. She stops waiting for apologies. She stops reliving conversations in her head trying to make sense of why he didn't stay. Instead, she comes back to her center. She learns to trust that if something ended, it's because something sacred is beginning. And it's not outside, it's within. And maybe that's the most beautiful part, that the love you were searching for in someone else was actually waiting for you to come back to yourself. Not with desperation, but with devotion. Because when you embody your truth, fully, unapologetically, you become unforgettable. Not for your beauty, not for your charm, but for your presence. Your presence becomes your power. Your wholeness becomes your magnetism. And your peace becomes your proof. The feminine power of saying, I'm done without bitterness. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. A power that isn't loud, but immovable. It's the moment a woman looks at what she once begged for, and no longer wants it. Not because she's angry, not because she wants to teach him a lesson, but because something deeper inside her has outgrown the hunger for crumbs. And with a voice soft but certain, she says, I'm done. This is not a tantrum. This is not bitterness. This is sacred clarity, the kind that rises after too many nights wondering what more you could have done, after too many mornings waking up with hope that turned into silence, after too many versions of yourself that you had to bury just to be tolerated. This moment isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. And the beauty of this kind of ending is that it's not about revenge or proving anything. It's about peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've faced yourself fully, when you've stopped negotiating your needs, when you've stopped waiting for him to wake up and finally see you. Because now, you see you. There is a unique dignity in the feminine when she walks away whole. Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, a woman who walks away whole has nothing to prove, nothing to explain, nothing to defend. She doesn't burn the bridge. She simply stops standing on it. She doesn't slam the door. She just closes it gently and walks into the light of her own truth. And, yes, she grieves. But it's a clean grief, not polluted by self-blame or resentment. It's the grief of a woman who finally chose herself. A grief that clears space for something real, something aligned, something that doesn't make her question her worth just to feel loved. This kind of woman, she doesn't ask, will he regret it? She asks, Do I still abandon myself in subtle ways? And when the answer becomes no, when she no longer trades her intuition for attention, she doesn't need to be feared or chased. She becomes remembered, revered, respected, because nothing is more powerful than a woman who says, "I'm done," not with her fists, but with her soul. Ritual of reunion, rewriting the memory of rejection. There's a part of you that still waits, not for him, but for a moment that never came, a goodbye that honored what you gave, a closure that made the pain make sense. But rejection rarely offers that kind of grace. It leaves you holding the weight of unspoken words, unanswered questions, unfinished love, and so it stays, in your body, in your breath, in the quiet ache of remembering. But healing asks for something different. It doesn't wait for them to return. It waits for you to reclaim your voice. And one of the most powerful ways to begin that reclamation is to speak what was never said, not to them, to yourself. So take a moment, just you, your truth, and a blank page, and write. Write the letter you never sent, the one that carries everything you held inside, the anger, the sadness, the confusion, the love, the goodbye. Let it all come through without shame, without filters. Let it pour out like a river unclogging. This letter isn't for revenge, it's for release. It's not about changing the past. It's about changing the relationship you have with it. Because when you speak the unsaid, you free the part of you that stayed frozen in that moment. The part of you that kept replaying it, hoping to rewrite the ending. But the ending doesn't come through their return. It comes through your return to yourself. And when the letter is finished, when every corner of your heart has been voiced, do something sacred with it. Burn it. Offer it to the ocean. Bury it beneath a tree. Let it leave your hands the way he left your life, without needing to come back. Louise Hay said, "I am willing to release the need for this pattern. Not because it never mattered, but because you matter more now. More than the story. More than the pain. More than the silence. This ritual isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about no longer letting the hurt define you. It's about honoring what was, while releasing what no longer serves your becoming. Because some stories aren't meant to end with answers. They're meant to end with freedom. Real story. The woman who became irresistible the moment she stopped explaining herself. She used to apologize for everything. For feeling too deeply. For asking too much. For wanting clarity in a world that offered only half answers. She would explain her emotions like they were burdens. Soften her edges to make others feel more comfortable. She believed that being lovable meant being less. And still, they left. Not because she was too much, but because she had never been enough for herself. Not really. Her light was always dimmed. Her truth, always edited. Her boundaries, always delayed. Until one day, after another painful silence, something shifted. She stopped explaining. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally did. She cared enough to stop translating herself into smaller words. She cared enough to let go of what didn't honor her depth. She cared enough to realize that her sensitivity was not a weakness. It was her superpower. And in that moment, she stopped performing. She started existing. And something changed. People began to respond to her differently. Not because she became someone new, but because she returned to who she really was. The woman who didn't chase, who didn't justify, who didn't mold herself to fit into someone else's emptiness. She walked into rooms with presence, not performance. She became a quiet force. And the irony? The moment she no longer needed anyone to stay, people couldn't stop wanting to. Not out of obsession, but out of respect, out of awe. Because nothing is more magnetic than a woman who stands in her truth without needing it to be approved. She no longer needed to be understood to feel valid. She no longer gave access to people who couldn't hold her heart with care. And the woman who once begged to be chosen now chose herself. Daily, gently, fiercely. That's what made her unforgettable. Not her beauty, not her charm, but her decision to exist fully, without apology. When you become the woman who is no longer afraid to lose, there's a sacred shift that happens when you stop living in fear of loss. Not because you don't care anymore, but because you've learned to care differently. You no longer cling, beg, or wait. You no longer view someone leaving as a reflection of your value. Instead, you begin to see it as life rearranging itself to make space for what truly aligns. That kind of freedom doesn't come from detachment. It comes from reverence. From finally honoring your soul enough to trust that what is meant for you won't ask you to shrink, suffer, or chase. It comes from understanding that being loved is not about being needed. It's about being met. And when you reach that point, when you no longer fear being left, you move through the world with grace. You love with openness, but not with desperation. You show up fully, but not blindly. You give, but you don't abandon. Your love becomes a gift, not a contract. Because now, you know, losing someone who doesn't value your essence is not a loss. It's liberation. What you once called heartbreak, you now recognize as redirection. What once triggered your deepest fears now activates your deepest truths. This is the woman who does not perform to be kept. She simply is, rooted, clear, alive. And in that state, love is no longer survival. It's a celebration, a sacred meeting of two whole beings, not a patch for old wounds. Louise Hay reminds us, love is never outside of ourselves. It is always within. And when you finally anchor into that love within, you don't become hard. You become holy. You don't close off. You open to yourself first, and then to the world. You are not for everyone. And that's not rejection. That's refinement. That's alignment. That's the divine hand of life sculpting you into someone unforgettable, not because of who stays, but because of who you refuse to stop being. Conclusion. From rejected to reborn, your soul as the one no one can afford to lose. Rejection often feels like the end of love, the end of worth, the end of possibility. But what if it's not the end at all? What if it's the sacred beginning? Louise Hay once said, "I am in the right place, at the right time, doing the right thing." And maybe, just maybe, that rejection was life's way of redirecting you, not away from love, but toward it. Real love, the kind that begins with you. There is something divine in what you've just walked through, not because the pain was deserved, but because it was alchemized, because you didn't let it break you into pieces. You let it break you open, to truth, to clarity, to power. And from that opening, something new was born. You, not the version of you who settled for less just to be held, not the one who waited by the phone, who questioned her worth in someone else's silence, but the you who came back stronger, softer, yes, but wiser, clearer, braver, the you who doesn't ask to be remembered because she's become unforgettable. Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds us that the whole woman is not the one who's never been broken. She's the one who remade herself with her own hands, who looked into the dark and didn't run, who sat with her wounds until they whispered wisdom. That's who you are now, a woman who doesn't need saving, a woman who listens to her soul and honors what she hears. You don't need to be desired, you need to be true. And when you embody your truth, fully, deeply, unapologetically, you become a force, a light, a presence that can't be denied. So if this chapter of your life closed, it wasn't punishment, it was preparation for what you're becoming, for the love you're now ready to receive, for the peace you're meant to carry. You're not just healing, you're rising, and the world is about to feel it. If this journey spoke to your heart, I invite you to subscribe and stay close to this space, where truth meets tenderness, and healing becomes sacred. And as you walk forward, click on the video on your screen now. It's waiting to meet you exactly where you are, and take you even deeper into your own becoming.